This is cruelty, which we cannot accept.
So whatever President Musharraf might say, it's far from clear whether these men have turned against the Taliban. The fighting might just be the result of clan rivalries within the Taliban. What's not in doubt is the importance of these safe havens in Pakistan to the resurgence of Al-Qaeda and the Taliban.
Disappearances too, which were unheard of in our country's history, have become the order of the day. And even as I speak to you, a Pak origin American, Dr. Sarki, has disappeared, not because he supports extremists, but because he's a nationalist and the level of intolerance for differing views is so high that people can disappear simply for supporting nationalism.
You see, for example, I think Americans have never made a strong case for restoring the Supreme Court, or Mr. Negroponte could have gone and visited the great Chief Justice who was so unceremoniously set aside. Now, why? What the Chief Justice was doing was that in Pakistan, hundreds, perhaps a couple of thousand people have disappeared, and many of them have been handed over to the United States. And the Chief Justice was demanding, getting more and more impatient, demanding that these people be produced in court, and if the Pakistani officials fail to produce them, he is going to hold them under contempt of court, and he was going to haul up the high military officials, intelligence officials in the Supreme Court to testify. Now, this is Guantanamo Bay of Pakistan. This is, extraordinary rendition of Pakistan. In other words, the Pakistani Supreme Court was going to play a very strong role in investigating things that the US courts do not. And that became a threat both to the Pakistani military structure, which has done these things, and to the United States, on whose orders it has done so. So they are playing very cool on the question of restoring those judges. Not a squeak comes out. Hold the elections, but not restore the judiciary.
A partnership in the war on terror forged in the aftermath of 9/11 and critical to this country's national security is being sorely tested tonight in Pakistan. A day after Pakistan's president, who was also head of the army, assumed emergency powers and suspended basic rights, his government has moved quickly to silence any and all opposition. And that is not sitting well in Washington. The Bush administration, which has promoted democracy in the region and invested billions of dollars in Pakistan, is tonight reviewing further aid to the country.
So, state of emergency in place. Let's take a look at how this situation has arisen. Well, it follows months of political turmoil and growing instability. In March, Musharraf tried to sack the Supreme Court's Chief Justice, Iftikhar Mohammed Chowdhury, but the move backfired when the court threw out misconduct charges against Chowdhury and he was reinstated. Well, in July, a week-long siege of the Red Mosque in Islamabad ended with a bloody battle and the deaths of 105 religious students during a raid by government forces. The attack on one of Pakistan's most sacred religious centres caused outrage in the country's tribal region. Well, more than 800 people have died in violence following the breakdown of a ceasefire with fighters in Waziristan. Riding a wave of popular support, former Prime Ministers Nawaz Sharif and Benazir Bhutto began negotiations to return from exile. Well, Sharif was deported when he came back in September, but his deportation's since been ruled illegal. Benazir Bhutto's return to lead her Pakistan People's Party in October was marred by violence after an attack on her convoy killed 139 of her supporters. Well, while Musharraf waits for a ruling on the legality of his presidential election, he has cracked down on the opposition, arresting chief political activists and religious leaders across the country.
It's martial law in the name of the war on terrorism. Pakistani troops ringed government buildings less than 24 hours after President General Pervez Musharraf declared a state of emergency and suspended the Constitution. Today, police arrested up to 500 opposition leaders, lawyers, and van loads of human rights activists. There is still a heavy security presence here as the state of emergency continues. But once again today, it's the lawyers who are leading the opposition. Dressed in their customary black suits and ties, lawyers here for a second day clashed with police. The demonstrations were noisy, but fairly small. Yet it's these business suit revolutionaries who want to topple President Pervez Musharraf, reinstate the Constitution, and end bans on the media. One of the most noticeable differences here has been the crackdown on the media. Before, these were all privately owned television stations, many critical of Musharraf. Tonight, they're all blocked, taken off the air. The Prime Minister said it's all necessary to stop Al-Qaeda and Taliban militants who have taken over parts of lawless tribal areas along the border with Afghanistan. President Bush has criticized the emergency law.
Our hope now is that he hurry back to elections.
Pakistan will start moving.
But so far, the White House isn't threatening action against Musharraf, seen as a major ally in the fight against Al-Qaeda and the Taliban. Critics say the move is more about protecting Musharraf himself. The Supreme Court here had been expected to rule this week that Musharraf, the U.S.-backed general who seized power in a coup in 1999, is ineligible to remain president. As part of the crackdown, Musharraf removed 12 of the 17 judges.
Musharraf has launched a preemptive strike because he is worried that the Supreme Court will try and prevent him from carrying on as president.
Musharraf says this is all temporary and that elections will be held here in 2 months. But he might not have that long. The main opposition leader, former Prime Minister Benazir Bhutto, says she is no longer willing to negotiate with Musharraf and is threatening demonstrations later this week.
You attributed the rise in fundamentalism and radical extremism to the dictatorship and lack of democracy. The question, what would you do and your party to deal with the network of madrasas, schools, that are infiltrated with Wahhabi ideology? And we're not only talking about today, you're training an entire generation of children who do not believe in democracy. What would you do with it?
Well, I agree with you that this is another very big challenge because nowadays we have three kinds of madrasas in Pakistan. One is the traditional madrasa which teaches people their religious duties and obligations. The second is a madrasa which basically brainwashes our children into intolerance. So the battle that and the third madrasa is the one which is acting as the headquarters of the militant groups, as we saw in the issue of the Red Mosque. So I thank you for drawing my attention to the middle madrasa, which is the value system, because this is a battle for values, that are we going to move in the direction of a pluralistic society or not. And I feel that nobody in my country should have the right to teach people hate, to teach them violence, and to brainwash them from the very beginning in extremist thought, to prepare them, which is why we would like to reform those madrasas. And if anybody does not teach the approved curriculum, or we don't even care about approved curriculums, what we care about is that you cannot teach people hate and you cannot teach them violence. You cannot say you have to kill people of a different faith or you have to kill people of a different ethnicity. So as long as madrasas abide by those rules, they will be allowed to function, and if they don't, they will be shut down.
You don't feel, though, they should also have the responsibility to teach, say, the basics of science, math, whatever, so people can essentially in society and world?
You know, Richard, we did that. I did that. I know it's being talked about Musharraf now, but my government, actually everybody thinks the war of terrorism began now. For me, it began much earlier with the first attack on the World Trade Towers. And in 1993, Pakistan was on the brink of being declared a terrorist state. My government arrested Ramzi Yousaf, the man who was behind the first attack on the World Trade Towers. My security people didn't want to give him up because he had not only attacked the World Trade Towers, he had tried to kill me to stop me from becoming Prime Minister of Pakistan. But I handed him over and we began an investigation, and that's when we discovered these madrasas, political madrasas that had been set up secretly by funds during the Afghan jihad, and we found that there were students from 126 different countries who had come to be recruited and enrolled in these madrasas. And that's when my Ministry of Interior and my Ministry of Education worked together